Episode 9.
We're back.
We are.
We had a break, Easter.
Hmm.
Anything fun?
I went away with my sisters. We had a spa break at Champneys, which was nice for a night. Then family stuff. It doesn't change. It's still going on. I don't leave the family. Even if I've left the family for a few days, I don't leave the family, which is important, I think. How has yours been? You went away as well.
Yep. Some family things, and I'm sure we'll talk about that when we deep dive into family. But also some friends went off to Devon and looked at the sea. The good thing is that I couldn't surf, but I wouldn't have been able to anyway. The waves were the wrong type and going in the wrong direction, but that made for dramatic photographs and lots of cream teas. So no bad thing. This week has been magnificent. And so maybe both you and I will be in the ocean at some point in a variety of different ways. You've still got to use those expensive kites.
I've got 2 more to use. I have 3. One's been
Wow.
already birthed.
Yeah, I mean, I'm halfway through. I don't know if I want to say this publicly. Another skateboard build. I'm building this one with Claude, who seems to know quite a lot about 1970s skateboards. I think sometimes it's better at that stuff, cultural stuff, than it might be writing blogs. Not that I use it for that. We started a discussion around, or a series around relationships, instigated by a conversation that you'd had with your partner, Nicole, and we began to explore your relationship and men's relationship with significant others. We looked at particularly the menopause, not to a conclusion, but some early observations about our role, if there is one in that. And just to remind people listening, that was podcast 8. There's also more than show notes. There's a downloadable PDF with some of your thoughts that you had created with a couple of other people as well that are particularly useful that people can download and take a read through. We had said on that occasion that we were going to explore relationships from a variety of perspectives, and that we would read and that we would blog and talk about that for the next 8 weeks until something else, not until something else comes up, but we'd let it dominate our thinking because obviously it's a substantial part of our lived experiences as men. We start this week with a conversation that came up, or building on a conversation that came up in the last men's gathering. Tell me a little bit about that as a starting point, Karl.
Yeah, so we gathered just over a week ago, 10 of us here at your place, and there were definitely some themes that came up around it was around our relationship with ourselves, our mind and our body, but of course that extends beyond just our own entity that we exist in. And there were some things that came up around boundaries, around self-care, permission to do things that would enrich ourselves and give us a little bit of balance within our life. And that's where we're going to take the journey. There were some other themes that came up, relationships with bosses, relationships with ailing parents, and struggles with what we should and shouldn't do within society. But there's one theme that we're just going to run through a little bit more today. And it is with our significant others and perhaps how we might be able to speak some truths from a position of honesty, from a position of love and compassion, and come to a productive, not necessarily conclusion, but a productive conversation that comes off the back of that.
Yeah, and this was instigated by a talking point, which was when you put in a thought starter around self-care. What does that mean? And we quickly got to space to think, space to drink, space to skate, or whatever our pastimes might be. And the negotiation for that space, where some people find that particularly easy and some people find it more challenging. And that's not just because of circumstances like the number of family members, but perhaps about the brokerage of interpersonal dynamics. So that's where we kind of started, which was like a conversation around, okay, well, how do you ask for the time to be able to go and spend 4 hours surfing up and down a river with 5 kites or whatever you're using? So that's where it started. We talked about how to have those conversations, and that they can be complicated or complex because there might be mixed emotions going into them and during them.
Yeah, they can be uncomfortable conversations to begin with because we're being honest with ourselves. We're asking what are my needs in this situation, and I don't know, identifying our own individual needs and what is important for us to show up in a certain way. So the conversation went around my relationship with my wife and how we're very good over time, over many years, of identifying what we need in our daily, weekly, and monthly schedules that allows us to show up in a better place, that allows us to be the father, the husband, the partner, the friend, in a more constructive manner, rather than showing up depleted, rather than showing up with maybe resentment, maybe with regret, maybe just feeling fucked off with familial life. It is, how can I show up in a better balanced way for myself and for those people that I care and love in my life as well.
And we're talking about there time, particularly in this instance, we're talking about time away from the family. Physically, whether that is proximate to the family and you're up in an upper room or in an office or in the garden shed, or actually, some distance away, undertaking a sport or taking a break and holidaying. And it's a two-way thing, in particularly in your relationship, seemingly balanced between what you may need and what your partner may need. But it's not just needs within the container of the family, but it's actually individually personal needs, which are somewhat discrete or separate from the dynamic of that as it runs in parallel.
Yeah, spot on. And it doesn't mean that we need to identify, this is exercise time for me, this is reading time for me, this is walking time, this is social time. It is, you have this time and you can do with that what you like, and I'm going to have this time. And it's as balanced as we can possibly make it.
Yeah.
Sometimes we get caught in traffic, sometimes we get stuck at the crossroads here in Shoreham, and the trains take time. But, it is an agreed, I'm going to go do this. Nicole went to the gym this morning with her friend at 7. I did a bit of yoga in the garden at the time that she was away at the gym. And then when she came back, I was then able to go and do a bit more of a workout as well. So it's agreed, balanced time, still working on the roles that we have in our family, looking after our boys, making sure they're watered, fed, and tended to as well.
Yeah. And for yourselves.
And for ourselves.
As adults. I think what was really interesting was then this occasional behaviour, which is to attempt to hook back into that negotiated time from the other partner, whether that's with one or many messages, or when all hell breaks loose and it becomes quite overwhelming for the parent that's holding space and doing the responsibilities of familying, is that a word? Familying, at that moment, versus the person who's off sort of kiting or walking or in the gym. And sometimes our sort of need or desire to sort of like reel them back in and bring them back into situation and circumstance. What I found particularly interesting there was this idea that rather than say don't do it, set an expectation of what will happen when it's done. And Michelle and I we call it a dog word, but it's like an emergency phrase. So we might have exchanges via WhatsApp or any other mechanism, messages or texts or even calls, but when something sort of escalates to DEFCON 4, then there'll be a word that like is added. Now, part of this is for security reasons, if there's sort of fraudulent behavior on our accounts or whatever, and that actually happened this week in one of our bank accounts. There was an anomaly, and we kind of went to the safe word to make sure that we were speaking to one another. But it could also be used like when the shit really hits the fan. Do you ever have those situations where one or the other of you needs you to return to base?
Not return to base, but I can definitely think of yet. I'm not saying it will never happen. I can definitely think of times when I have had to call her, Nicole, and ask, where is this?
Yeah.
I'm in the process. I've got the boys. We're looking to get ready for school. I'm missing this. Can you just help for a moment?
Right.
And there's been times vice versa that she has had to call me and just check in. Can you just let me know where that is? Or can you let me know what time you're coming back because something shifted?
Yeah.
So we will allow that. Absolutely, we'll allow that. But that's taken us a while of negotiating. If I'm receiving constant commentary about something that's happening back at our home whilst I am doing activity X, that's an encroachment for me. That's an encroachment on my time, and that boundary is not there for being stuck to.
And that's, I think, where we concluded was that may be fine.
Yeah.
If this is not Nicole's behaviour, but if it were Nicole's behaviour, it's not your role to correct it. Not that you could, but you can set expectations of what you will then do as a consequence.
Absolutely.
Which might be to not engage and respond. It's not to say you'd ignore. So I think that was quite useful. And I think it was a prelude to a whole conversation about non-confrontational or non-violent communication. And obviously these are systems and frameworks that have been talked about in psychology for many, many years. There's lots of books, some of which I've read, and many more that I've just got on my bookcase to look smart, about non-violent communication and communication and loops and feedbacks. I'm going to bring a particular book that I then picked up as a consequence of our gathering a week ago and started to read. You and I are in parallel reading 2 or 3 books related to relationships. There is one called Fierce Intimacy by a gentleman called Terry Real. He's got a lovely way about him. I believe he's a Jewish New Yorker and would identify as such. And so he's got a very fun way of talking about some incredibly serious issues and or not just issues, but opportunities. The book is particularly, to paraphrase it, standing up to another person in love. So I think it suggests that you are in love with the significant other, but also how to come from a position of love and yet still have what could be quite confrontational conversations. I would recommend, if anyone likes a good audiobook while skateboarding or likes to read, then it's a brilliant read. There was something particularly in there, and I want to pick up on it, and we can explore it, called the opportunity to sit with a significant other partner and present what he terms as the core negative image to the other person. What he meant by this was that if we start assuming a position of love, that we're in love and that we care very much and wish for good outcomes from one another, the first thing that we would do is ask if we could give some feedback. And is the other person emotionally, physically, circumstantially in a position to receive it?
That would be helpful if it's kind of preempted as well, isn't it? Like I'm doing the washing up and all of a sudden you come at me and say, I just want to give you some feedback now, by the way.
And you may not be ready for that. No. You might sort of say, okay, well, just give me a moment. I'm going to finish this task. Or no, now is not the time that this is going to be appropriate. But I understand it's important to you, so I will make time. Or fuck off, Karl.
Now?
And that is also interesting to go, okay, well, otherwise you're just going to bludgeon straight in with your feedback, even though that might have come from a position of love. So it is to respect that we need to understand whether the information can be received and is it appropriate at the time. The second sort of preface to this technique is to say, no matter what I say, I will be in love with you and expect to be in love with you until the end of days. So that we know that the outcome is not I am threatening our relationship and that actually I'm looking for a way out here, or I expect there to be a cataclysmic result of what I'm about to say, but I still need to say this and give you feedback. I think that's a helpful, again, a container of love to go, there is a behaviour I would like to explore, but it's not, the consequence of it is not about a currency of love. I'm not going to love you more or less. That's unconditional. It's not necessarily unconditional, is it? But that's not changing. I think that's helpful as a preface. Then it is to say, in the case of what Terry Real wrote about, here are 3 or 4 personality traits that I fucking really dislike about you. Well, they're not about you, that you demonstrate. You don't have to necessarily use profanity in that sentence. But it is to say, and I think it is important to separate the behaviour from the person. And what I mean by that, for example, you are rude is different from you behaved in a rude way. And the behaviour is rude, rather than to say somebody is rude. I think that's a general point about trying not to necessarily attach behaviours to identity. You behaved in an angry way to the children, not you are angry. That may also be true, but that's quite incendiary. So useful to sort of think about how the feedback is given, but then to pick up on this idea. This is not my view of myself. It is, say for example, it was you and I. It is your view of me. So I may not believe it. I may not believe it to be true or factual, but that's not what's important. What's important is it's someone else's view of myself. And obviously somebody I care deeply about, respect and admire. So that's the start of the technique. There are some behaviours that you demonstrate that I find dreadful. And you can throw in emotional words there. You kind of see how they land.
Are we doing this for real now?
No, I don't think first of all, we're not in that type of intimate relationship. Although I love you, but I think this is particularly between partners. And then I think it is to sit with that reaction. It's going to feel like something. It's definitely going to be impactful. And I think that it is important to prepare to have time to allow that to be absorbed and to be careful about what is said and what happens next. These are tiny, or not always tiny, little hand grenades that are being placed diplomatically on a table. And they are not to be then used as a stick to beat one another up with. They're areas to explore. So a really interesting technique, this core negative image.
You can feel the rawness of that, really, can't you? Like I can sit here and feel not edgy, but there's an edginess to the kind of conversation that will ensue if you can create the space and the time and the boundary for this. Mm-hmm. Again, if you're going to do this, if you're listening to this and you think that's a great idea, I'd really encourage you to set some boundaries around this. Set some time aside. Don't do this in between, like the ad breaks in between an episode on Netflix.
No.
This is something that you need time to unpack and time to sit with and time to reflect on, but also, and we'll come on to this, I'm sure, perhaps an opportunity, if you're being told some of these things about yourself, or indeed you're saying these things about someone else, that person needs an opportunity, or it would be beneficial for them to have an opportunity to have some kind of dialogue around this.
Absolutely.
It's not accusational, although it might feel a little bit accusational at times.
It's going to smart.
Yeah.
It is going to smart. So Michelle and I did this. So to your point, we had a 4-hour car journey and were listening to this book. And Terry then made this suggestion. So as is often the case with Michelle and I, we turned the audio thing off and we were like, okay, well, we've got an hour racing towards Gloucester Services. That was obviously going to cost us £100 for 2 sausage rolls and a cup of tea. And I think we both believe that we're in a sufficiently loving, safe relationship that we could do this without negative consequence. It's interesting to think who goes first. Because obviously if there's, it's like, first of all, agree that, is this bilateral? Are you both going to have a go at this?
Who was driving?
I was driving. Michelle went first.
Yeah.
And she didn't hold back either. So she identified 4 or 5 personality traits. I know, and I'm sure some of these things are sat quite close to the surface. Yeah. It's absolutely like roll your sleeves up. Yeah. What this is not is we're in a boxing ring and I'm dropping my guard and you can land 5 punches for free. It's not that. Although if you want to play, you can try that. It's slightly sadomasochistic behaviour. But that said, they are still blows that land. So to your point about allowing somebody the time to process it. Now, they are the truth that Michelle believes in her mind, regardless of whether I think they are true or less true. There's evidence whether I like it or like it less. And the gold in it is that regardless of my reaction, it being placed there and spoken about openly it can be an opportunity, entirely depending on what Michelle then does with it. If she then creates a stick that she's going to beat me with every time I demonstrate the behaviour, or I react negatively to it. And we could have a whole other podcast about what a negative reaction is to that. But the goal is to sit with it and to go, okay. What we then did was take the time to say, please give me some evidence of what that is like when it manifests.
Did you do all three? So did Michelle land the 3 blows simultaneously?
Oh yeah, they came in like a double punch and then an uppercut.
Whilst you're driving?
Yeah, while I was driving, it was like jab, jab, blow.
Yeah.
There was a pause between each one, but we didn't do them. We didn't look at one and then deep dive it. We kind of laid, here are 5 things.
Yeah.
It might have been 3 or 4. And some of them were comparatively minor. For example, I am messy. Some of them might be more significant. We'll come on to it. And so we laid them all there so that I could sit in discomfort for a few moments to go, okay, that's quite uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to hear because it's partially true. And you kind of then take that inward look at yourself and you're like, I can recognize that.
Did you say that?
Yeah, and it's okay to express, okay, this is quite uncomfortable.
But did you say, I can also see what you're saying?
Yes. Now, you could also have a situation where you kind of go, I don't see that at all because it's a blind spot.
Yeah.
Then you can make your excuses. So I may have excuses for a behavioural trait of untidiness. In my mind, I'm deliberate and incredibly tidy, but it takes me a process to get from walking in through the front door to a skateboard being stored where skateboards are stored in the house. And that might mean 4 or 5 pickups, which seemingly to anyone else might be incredibly inefficient. But what I'm doing is making multiple trips around the house and moving things by feet and not necessarily picking up one thing and taking it back to the point of origin, if this makes any sense. So there are piles of things which are on their way to somewhere. But obviously Michelle's lived experiences, the house is full of piles of things. In my mind, we're going through a process that I never complete. So I wouldn't identify as messy. I would identify as incredibly deliberate about where I put things such that I can find them again, because otherwise I'm the where are my keys guy. But her lived experiences, there's just piles of stuff in places that become trip hazards. It's interesting how different people see, we look at the same thing from different perspectives.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't often have the benefit of being able to see from someone else's perspective until that perspective is identified for us. Mm-hmm. Then there's an opportunity for us to recognize, acknowledge that, and we might, or we might not, then choose to do something about that.
And then ask, okay, what emotion does that evoke for Michelle? So assuming that it is true that there are piles of electronic equipment and surfboards and blah lying around the house, that's the fact. Then what is the feeling and the story that Michelle tells herself about it as a consequence? Because it's not going to be joy.
No,
it's going to be one of the other 6. If there are 7 emotions and nuances and flavors of each, then it's likely to be anger. And so it's useful to then explore, well, how does that make you feel? Regardless of how it makes me feel. It's someone else's shared experience of our life, right? Then you get to, how would you prefer to feel? And that is quite straightforward. And then you can get to, well, what would I need to do in order for that to be how you feel? Doesn't mean I'm going to do it. It just means that we've identified a behavior and a different behavior, and then there lies an opportunity. Now, this is the point, I think, where you cannot then pick that up as a stick and go, right, you fucker, you will from now on behave like this. Or every time you don't, I go, I told you it would be better if you put your slippers away. That's going to be unhelpful. But in the moment of this exploration, I think it's quite useful to agree what different would look like, regardless of whether you action it or not. Because it comes into the conscious awareness then of, okay, well, if I shut the doors in the kitchen, someone else's experience is going to be different to their current experience. There's nothing wrong with a few cupboard doors being open, arguably, but it makes somebody else feel uncomfortable in their own home. I can still leave the fuckers open, but I may be aware of a consequence of that. that just a little awareness might mean that I change a behaviour by a degree. Make sense?
It makes perfect sense. Yeah, there's something that's because I'd imagine that on some times, just running with that a little bit more, and there's a particular phrase in my mind, where you stand depends on where you sit. On some days, Michelle, for example, might find the cupboard doors in the kitchen being open more or less annoying. Depends on on her level of capacity at that moment in
Exactly.
time, and whether the doors are left open or not will depend perhaps on your capacity some of the time as well.
Yep.
If you have multiple things that you're juggling at the time, it may be that the door being left open is just not on your radar. And because even though it's already been mentioned, it might then be like, oh, I've just got so many other things that are more important.
And that might be interesting to both observe it oneself, but also for the incredibly significant other to go, okay, something's happening here because we've had a deliberate conversation about it. And yet this is happening more, not less, today, this week, this season, whatever it might be. So we've had occasion to then consequentially, this was a week ago, to make some minor adaptations. Now, whether they stick as behaviours, that's a question that I might ask myself again in a month to sort of say, okay, have we returned to type or to form rather than type? Slightly different meanings to those two phrases. Or has there been adaptations, and how do we now feel about those adaptations? Now, opening doors and piles of things may or may not be of any consequence versus when somebody puts a slightly larger grenade on the table which says, you are rude. Now, the other thing about this is not to sort of go, sometimes you're a little bit minor inconvenience, a little, you're meant to dial it up to the, when you're at your very worst, you're an absolute dick. You're not trying to put top spin on this to make it hurt more, but you're going to the sort of the fullest manifestation of that control drama. And so one of mine was that I'm rude, and there have been occasions where I've been really unpleasantly rude to other people who've been in our company. That hurt. Like hearing it hurt. Now, I attempted to justify my reaction to a couple of situations, but the consequence ended up at the same net position, which was, for everyone else who's not trying to justify the behaviour, that would have just felt rude.
So how did that land?
It's not a low blow, but I was definitely drawn in by the sucker punch. So the sucker punch was the doors open, and then the sort of the uppercut that took me to a 9 count. I don't know where this boxing analogy's come from, but nevertheless, it was like that one stung. It really stung, but it was also true. And I asked for a for instance, and I got one. And it's recent. I had returned home during my recovery from the operation that we talked about in the past. There was some people in the house who I understood that some people were coming around, a couple of people were coming around for a sauna. I came back an hour after I thought that they would have left. And actually what was happening was an improvised or an impromptu party in my kitchen with half-naked people all over the house, some of whom I recognised. And, there was alcohol being drunk. And all of that is fine. It's Michelle's home. She can have a party. It's just a bit of music on and a few people sort of like in sauna gear. But it completely threw me. And even though I thought I recovered the situation, within a few breaths, I kind of took myself out of the room, went off and gave myself a talking to, and returned and attempted to recover the situation by being slightly more pleasant. The first 30 seconds of my interactions with those people as I walked into my own home was unpleasant. And so to sit with that was gold.
At the time, do you mean, or retrospectively in the conversation?
To sit with the
car?
feedback from someone I love and respect and would wish to please, to know that that was unpleasant and displeasing. Then you really get to the crux, right? I'm in this relationship because I want Michelle to be fulfilled and to enjoy her life and to live her best life. And if I can do that in concert with her, it's not my gift to give, but if I can do that in concert with her, then it's really good. If I'm doing something that actually just like creates a bit of friction and makes things a bit more difficult, that's an opportunity to question
I think there's elements of forgiveness in here for ourselves as well, isn't there?
For sure.
Right, we have to be open to the idea that we're not perfect,
Yep.
and that sometimes we do show up in ways that perhaps weren't in line with maybe what was happening in that situation. Right? When you were saying things like that, I can definitely feel myself being explosive towards my boys at times.
Yep.
I might have finished work, come downstairs without giving myself a buffer zone of decompression time, and I've walked into a situation, the house looks like a fucking mess, the boys are screaming and shouting, Nicole's cooking dinner, there's stuff going on, it's family life, but the energy that I'm bringing into there at that moment in time, and my reaction, not response, my reaction to that is misaligned with actually what's happening in that space. They're having a great time, they're bouncing around on the sofas, they're loving it, and it's all in Nicole's hands. And I literally mean she's fine with that, and she's not facilitating it, not encouraging it, but she's like, this is good, the boys are having a great time. I've walked in there in a very different mindset, and I've seen something completely different. We can't help sometimes but go, blah, this is my shit, and whatever I'm seeing in front of me is jarring for me.
Yep.
We are humans, we do carry stuff with us, we carry bags with us all the time.
Totally. I agree that there's always going to be imperfection. It's inevitable and beautiful. That's what makes life so rich and colourful. However, there is also a conscious or subconscious consequence for the significant partner. Over time, for example, Michelle could avoid inviting me into situations or avoid situations if she felt or intuitively considered that might be a consequence. And that might be actually inhibiting for me or for her. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but 10, 20, 30 years later, when you look at a consequence, you might come back to the cause and go, okay, an unaddressed trait meant that we ended up at this destination. So I think it's an opportunity to accept the imperfection. Now, I can walk into 100 situations from now till, say, the end of the year, and I might get 95% of them will be the same outcome. I'm actually quite introverted unless I'm very comfortable or confident with the people that I'm with. I can find it difficult to engage, and that might be perceived as rude. And sometimes when my social battery drains instantaneously, and it did in that occasion, I was rude. Fact, the behaviour was rude. That may happen again.
But you pointed there at an opportunity. You said 95% of the time that might, but there's room there for something different.
The point here is that I might improve 5% of the time, whatever improve means.
Yeah.
It might improve by 15% of the time. If one of your children, and this is suggested in the book, if one of the children came back with a B when they had formerly got a C, you wouldn't go, what the fuck have you done? Where's the A? Unlikely. As a mature, balanced, emotionally intelligent parent, as you are, you're very likely to encourage the behaviour that got the B and ask whether it's able to be sustained. And they even might maybe improved upon. But what you're not likely to do is chastise the child for missing the A.
So there's an opportunity then perhaps from the significant other here to, if you've come in with a different reaction or a different response, there's an opportunity there for reflection as well, isn't there? And perhaps even a bit of a pat on the back that we can do metaphorically ourselves, but also, thanks for that. That was actually great to see you. It also, so on so many levels, it reinforces the person who's changing that behaviour. They are seen for having made a difference. It's not about getting it right or being perfect. And it's acknowledged by someone who has picked up that behavioural trait in the first instance and said, look, there's an opportunity here for growth or change or something different. That creates greater chances of neuroplasticity. It creates greater chance of behavioural change or shift. And that's great. For me, that's adaptation. That's where that beauty of evolving and working with one another, weaving our way through life and being closer, because it's very easy to drift.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just the way I am.
Yeah.
This is what I do.
Yeah, and then the other person to go, and this is what I tolerate.
Yeah.
And what I put up with. Now, you asked a question before we got into the podcast, was when we were exploring this, is there compromise then? And there is an opportunity. Compromise is one of those words that comes with such a heavy burden of, oh, it's a bad thing because I'm not behaving as I wish to behave, or I'm not doing what I wish to do. I'm sacrificing something. But compromise can also be a positive in so much as, okay, I'm affording a different outcome here, and I will benefit as much as a significant other will benefit. It's not a letting go of or giving away of something, but actually a shift and a movement to something more positive. That word comes with such negative connotations. You're having to be compromised or compromising, but actually we can reframe it as quite a positive to go, okay, there's an opportunity in this that is beneficial. And to your point, that reaffirming means that consciously or subconsciously I'll take the dopamine loop and do it again and do it again and do it again. Come to my house in a year's time, not only will I be really, really pleasant, but it'll also be really tidy.
You'll be hosting sauna parties.
Well, I host them already, but maybe I'll have just been to a few more social occasions and be a little bit more outgoing. And if I can get to 85% or 80% of the time, I'm sure I can do better than that. But we will then be able to come back to this core negative image and ask whether it is the same or if it's evolving. I don't think this is a single exercise. I don't think you necessarily need to do this every day. That's like opening a wound and then kind of like just picking at it. There's the notifications going off on the Mac that we said we mustn't do this. But nevertheless, it's not to reopen the wound often. It is to, again, if it's appropriate with your partner, to say, should we find time this weekend to check in on that conversation that we had 3 months ago and just to share observations? But again, that's not something that you necessarily just throw somebody 15 minutes later when you trip over their pile of shoes in the hallway. Again, it should be done when there is space to do that sufficiently. I want to just move it forward a little to say, after sort of 30 minutes of the conversation about some small stuff comparatively, the untidiness in the house, and some pretty big stuff like my potential rudeness in social circumstances. And after we'd explored that a little, the tables turned. And it was my opportunity to present the core negative image to my wife. Now, I think the point I'd like to make here is this is not an opportunity to get your own back.
Okay. Yeah, you could definitely feel like that's an opportunity.
Absolutely.
Bring it on.
It's like 20 minutes later, you've just been through the ringer. And if there's a little bit of latent anger, which might actually not be that you're angry with the partner, but you may be feeling shame or feeling guilt or disappointment in self. It's gonna conjure quite a lot of feeling, potentially. You might inadvertently sort of package that up into something and serve it back with topspin. So I think one needs to be mindful of that. I think it's useful to reset those conditions. Is this still an appropriate time for us to have this conversation? Because even in that 30-minute shift, Michelle might have gone, given what we've just experienced, I think we might just park it here. That would have been okay. I needed to ensure, or we wanted to ensure, that we were still in a safe environment. And once again, what I'm about to say comes from a position of love, and I'm still going to love you the other side of the conversation. I think recontracting even in that moment before you get to sort of do a volley of return fire. And that was interesting. Again, we started with some smaller, comparatively less consequential things. Messy versus tidy. This is just the toothpaste tube and whether someone squeezes it from the bottom or halfway up. No longer an issue in a plastic tube, but was an issue in the 1970s when they were made of aluminium, I guess. So a poor metaphor for anyone under the age of sort of like 40 who's listening to this. So we've just lost our Gen Z audience. We start with the simple stuff, and then we can get into some of the more sort of potentially challenging feedback. The final thing that we did was, once that space we were prepared to close the space, we did core positive image.
I'm pleased that there's balance here as well. So the core negative image is the point from Reel's book, Tony Reel.
Yeah, Terry Reel.
Terry Reel. But the core positive image doesn't appear in the book. Is that right?
No, but it obviously sits there in plain sight in a way.
Yeah.
Which is to say, okay, to conclude this, rather than to just leave it as a shit sandwich, one can conclude with, here are 2 or 3 things that I absolutely love about you that are extremely positive. Again, which the person may be very aware of, or sometimes may not be as aware of, or even less, or non-aware completely. If we can have a blindsided perspective on the negative stuff, or a blind spot, it may also be true of our positive traits. So we kind of concluded the conversation with, okay, here's some of the positive stuff, which just reaffirms that I don't love you any less.
Did you find 3 things or 5 things to say back to Michelle?
Oh, what? You mean in the core negative?
Positive.
Easily.
Yeah.
I mean, we could have been there for the rest of the journey.
That's nice.
Always. And there's no issue with reaffirming the positive stuff, right? I don't want to take it for granted. And it's always very pleasant to hear it. And we have that dualism. We can both be very positive, and there are areas for challenge and improvement, or just conscious awareness of. But we can be both of those. We are inevitably going to be both of those things simultaneously, right? So it's always good, I think, to come back to okay, let's put the lid back on Pandora's box, because it is explosive stuff. And we're just going to use some love there to just put the lid back on.
I think that's a nice circular journey with that, because it could just turn into a bit of a shit show. I think, as in it's just, or you're just being an arsehole. And again, depending on the ground that you stand on at the time that you're doing this, or sit on, depending on which metaphor you might want to use there. But I really like the fact you've rounded that, and you're actually able to finish that off, conclude it with some balanced positivity for someone as well.
It's incredibly important to not see this as an opportunity to vent your spleen or to have a fight. So if you're coming into this angry because you've just tripped over a surfboard and then said, can I give you some feedback? And I've said yes, and I get double tidy with topspin and then some other feedback as well. That's really not the point of this exercise. It's got to come from a very balanced starting position, which is we're doing this in order to inquire and to be curious and to move together. So I think it is useful to ensure that this is to your point, afforded the time, and then to close that loop as you get to the end of that process.
So this isn't going to be for every single relationship that's out there at the moment, is it?
I think if people are in troubled waters, this is not necessarily the right technique to address some of those. Now, some of those types of conversations may need facilitation with experts. There may need to be work done one-to-one with each partner, and then together. Obviously, there's frameworks like Relate for that. And then there's everything in between, what I'm talking about, and Relate. They're almost poles apart. But to your point, there's also going to be seasons where this will work and not work. And being emotionally intelligent about, okay, Michelle and I had 4 days together. We were in a really good place. We were confident that we could use the technique without it being explosive. Yeah, it's not going to work for every situation. What it might also do is be the platform for the opportunity to say, I need some space. To bring it back to the conversation that started in our gathering, when you're in that safe environment and we've begun to air some of our thoughts and feelings, we may also be able to say, you know what, I know that I'm rude, and I might need some space sometimes to be able to balance and consider my behaviors. I might need to change the way things are communicated. We might need to change some of our behaviors together. Once we're in that safe environment, go, okay, I've got your feedback now. I know this is pissing you off. But maybe there's the negotiation and the sort of recontracting within that safe framework.
I agree. I think that's a great opportunity to And maybe because of this, because of the honest conversation, then it means that we're more likely to recognize some of our own needs. You're given a platform to be able to express what they are. And it might be, I need to have some time to invest rather than as a consequence of I've done something, I now need time to go and decompress. How can I be proactive about this? How can I invest in our relationship, our time, use it wisely together, separately, with other? How can I then use this as an opportunity so I'm less likely to show up in those situations depleted? I'm going to have greater capacity to see, oh yeah, I can see that pile of stuff there, or I can have that slightly different response. I might be able to walk into a situation and take a bit of a breath.
Yeah, and that still may be a negotiation.
Completely.
Where, to make it oversimplistic, and we haven't done this, but it might be that Michelle and I agree that there's going to be an hour where I put everything away. She may or may not help in that process, but that we kind of recontract. So yeah, some of it might be that I just need to take myself discreetly out of a situation before putting myself back into it, such as I can do something that gives me capacity, or it might be that I actually need to go and do the work with a therapeutic other or whatever it might be to address some of that feedback. But we might be able to contract that as we're in that safe space. I'm aware that we've taken quite a lot of time to talk about this technique. For me, it's been useful to go from something simple, like how do I broker a little bit of time for myself to take time for self-care, literally taking time for a bit of self-care, to something quite consequential. I'm not saying that's not, but to something quite consequential, which is how do you deliver feedback into a relationship that can be extremely positive.
I think it's important that we took the time to do that because it has to be safe. If you're going to go through that process, you need to set boundaries. It needs to be safe. You need to perhaps have some ground rules in that conversation itself as well. And you gave some great examples, some workable examples. I'm sure I recognised in my own relationship. I'm sure many of the listeners will recognise in their own relationships. And we rounded it off. We gave a positive balance to the end of it as well.
Yeah.
I think if we'd have stopped halfway through, everyone will be on tenterhooks and
maybe.
craving the next episode.
In part two.
In part two.
We'll tell you how to take the pin out of the grenade.
Yeah.
I mean, and to adapt the technique, by the way, Michelle and I went full throttle and sort of gave each other 5 traits each. It's a lot, particularly if one is rude and messy and the other 3, which I'm not going to talk about now, otherwise it's another podcast. But you might just place one small gift on the table. And you might even agree that we'll just start with a slightly annoying character trait like leaving the toilet lid up, as opposed to necessarily going to the most contentious. We might train the muscle, and it might be that you give yourself time to adapt to a way of communicating together. I think I'm just very fortunate in my relationship with Michelle that, we're both coaches and we talk a lot, and we've had an opportunity to spend an awful lot of time in a car together in the last 2 or 3 weeks. And so it's quite easy for us to experiment with things which then may inform our coaching or our relationships with other people as well, or that we can guide others on. But yeah, we might just want to take it in small bites. There's a frog thing going on here, isn't there? You don't have to eat the whole frog in one bite.
It's really sensible. This is chapter 9. Episode 9.
That was episode 9.
Yeah, we're going to get to double digits, 2 hands worth.
Do we get a badge for your 10th
the
podcast?
Listeners should definitely get a badge.
They should get a reward. It'd be really great if people are able to do so, to take a moment to get some feedback.
What's the email?
The email is matt@mattcoaching. We'd love to know what other people's opinions are of the themes that we're exploring.
I'm enjoying these. I'm really finding them very beneficial myself. I hope you are. I hope the listeners are too.
All right. Well, we'll leave that as a cliffhanger for podcast 10. Thanks, Karl.